Donald Trump just handed Nancy Pelosi 9 seconds of complete, uninterrupted silence on live television, forcing her to confront the exact mathematics behind her $250 million fortune. You are not tuning in to a scripted political broadcast. You are observing an 86-year-old fixture of Washington, a person with 40 years of congressional influence entirely freezing up before millions of viewers. Her usual deflections and rehearsed expressions vanished the second her opponent took out a standard black marker to link 3 distinct dates, 3 highly lucrative market transactions, and 3 Justice Department interventions on a plain manila folder. He stared right at the official who had spent her entire public life sidestepping this exact level of examination and asked her to clarify the financial arithmetic. You cannot turn away from this moment because you are about to see the exact same leader who famously tore up a State of the Union speech, managed 2 presidential impeachments, and facilitated the political departure of Joe Biden get methodically cornered by her own public filing records. The setting was a CNN studio hosting a primetime discussion centered on public trust and congressional market participation, with Jake Tapper serving as the moderator. She walked in carrying herself with that recognizable elevated chin and subtle smile, broadcasting the sheer confidence of an executive who had been directing the nation's capital since before a majority of her peers even knew how to drive. She looked over at the competing podium with the dismissive attitude of a senior professor expecting a failing student. Then Trump entered the room holding that same folder from a prior appearance, although it appeared significantly thinner this time, and he assumed his spot with a quick nod toward the host. Her initial 5 minutes served as a masterclass in calculated superiority. She leveraged her 37 years of public service and her 2 terms holding the Speaker's gavel to steer the dialogue straight toward his 34 courtroom verdicts, utilizing a maternal yet sharp smile she had refined across 10,000 press briefings. Rather than taking the bait, Trump simply took the cap off his marker, jotted a specific month onto his folder, and displayed it for the broadcast cameras. He guided the focus directly to the technology sector, writing down a November date to pinpoint the exact moment her spouse acquired 50 call options in NVIDIA. The strike price was established at $120, carrying an entry cost ranging between $1 and $5 million, placed deep in the money with an extended expiration timeline. In the real world of high-level finance, that represents the precise footprint of an investor operating with absolute certainty that a stock chart is preparing to climb. Retrieving a second document from his folder, he illustrated the wider congressional context occurring at that exact period. Lawmakers were actively advancing the CHIPS and Science Act, a substantial legislative package filled with $52 billion in taxpayer incentives tailored specifically for semiconductor producers. He reminded the quiet room that she did not just casually back this legislation. She acted as its primary advocate, the lead vote organizer, and its most prominent public defender. Drawing a thick black arrow connecting the legislative action to the market purchase, he presented the undeniable timeline of events. Her partner places millions into the enterprise. She pushes forward billions in sector incentives. The company valuation surges, and her household secures roughly $4.5 million within a short 6-month window. Keeping her rigid posture, she responded with her standard defensive protocol. She stated her husband had operated as a legitimate venture capitalist for more than 4 decades, maintained that she personally held no equities, denied possessing any knowledge of his trading maneuvers, and dismissed the entire situation as a thoroughly disproven conspiracy theory. However, a political denial and a factual disproving are 2 entirely different concepts within the court of public opinion. Adopting a slower and more deliberate pacing than he utilized in previous appearances, Trump understood he was engaged in a long game against a seasoned operator who would not easily fold under pressure. He seamlessly transitioned to a second date, July 2024, indicating the exact day her spouse sold off 2,000 shares of Visa. That partial exit secured between $500,000 and $1 million right before the official disclosure was submitted 2 days later. Directly beneath that, he wrote down September 2024, highlighting the precise moment the Department of Justice targeted Visa with a major antitrust complaint. The corporate valuation consequently fell 5.5%, yet her family portfolio was already entirely protected, having vacated the position a highly convenient 11 weeks prior to the public announcement. Drawing an additional arrow, he advanced to the final piece of his financial exhibition by noting December 2022. Throughout that month, her husband released 30,000 shares of Google, and exactly 1 month following that move, the Justice Department hit the technology giant with its own antitrust action, displaying the paper high in the air. The pattern became visually impossible to ignore, showcasing 3 pairs of dates, 3 connecting arrows, and 3 flawless market exits. An individual might get lucky one time, and a second instance could be dismissed as an unusual coincidence by a forgiving observer. But 3 occurrences constitute a highly optimized system of wealth accumulation. The television broadcast went entirely quiet. Tapper stopped moving with his pen lingering above his notes, while a camera operator in the distant corner hurried to adjust his perspective to frame both podiums in a single tense shot. Moving from paper documents to human testimony, Trump lowered his voice to drop a much heavier anchor of accountability. He brought up a former staff member from her own legislative office who had recently provided sworn testimony before the House Oversight Committee. Maintaining the whistleblower's anonymity due to active official reviews, he shared that this insider confirmed legislative schedules and committee timetables were casually discussed during the family's dinner hours. Based on this sworn account, voting timelines and regulatory shifts served as standard mealtime conversation topics between the couple. Her chin elevated by a fraction of an inch, a tiny adjustment indicating a defense she had practiced for years. Yet Trump stepped ahead of her response, observing this was not some partisan fabrication, but the sworn statement of an individual who worked inside her office, witnessed the system operate, and finally concluded they could no longer keep the information hidden. Broadening the scope of the critique, he noted that ordinary citizens had already recognized the pattern and developed independent monitoring platforms like Unusual Whales and Quiver Quantitative specifically to track her family's market activities, because those transactions simply never fail. Wall Street investment firms actively replicate the strategies, and entire exchange-traded funds function exclusively to follow the momentum of her household's portfolio. A statistical analyst even ran the probabilities of securing 3 consecutive exits right before major federal interventions, arriving at staggering odds of 1 in 14,000. Those are not probabilities anyone bets millions of dollars on unless they possess a direct view of the strategy. Jotting down 2 additional figures side by side, Trump emphasized the massive wealth gap inherent in her public service career. A government official earning $223,500 annually over 37 years reaches a maximum of roughly $8.2 million in total lifetime compensation before taxes. Still, her net worth rests at a staggering $250 million. Tapping the display board with his marker, he asked her to clarify the difference, mentioning that his Wharton business background could not make those figures harmonize without including privileged insider awareness. For the very first time that evening, her famous composure cracked just slightly as her hand shifted toward her water glass. She picked it up, took a sip, and placed it back in a controlled manner, but it was the initial instance she had reached for the beverage, and the close-up cameras caught the tiny movement. Regaining her stance, She repeated that her husband's financial choices were his own concern, crediting his prosperity to free market intelligence and challenging the conservative dedication to capitalism. Trump responded instantly that he strongly favored the free market, but strongly opposed a skewed setup where the partner of the primary rulemaker gets to act on those regulations before the general public is ever notified. He then brought out a summary from a congressional oversight review showing her office schedule contained a specific note monitoring the semiconductor legislation's timeline a full 2 weeks before her husband started his massive technology acquisition. Her well-known smile faltered under the pressure of the documented proof. Leaning closer to the microphone, Trump broke down her abrupt political shift regarding trading limits. For years, she strongly impeded legislation designed to restrict congressional stock participation, justifying the habit under the concept of a free market system and guaranteeing her peers could join in. Yet the minute independent tracking software gained popularity, the pattern became impossible to hide, and average Americans began asking difficult questions. She conveniently changed her position and backed the restriction. He snapped his fingers, showing just how fast she altered her tune, but stated she only backed the update because she was noticed by the voting public. By the time she supported securing the vault, she had already gathered her $250 million and was merely seeking unearned public relations praise for shutting a door she had already walked through. She reached for her water glass a second time. Putting away the financial files, Trump shifted gears into a much more grounded and personal critique, bringing his familiar rally focus to speak directly to working-class families. He described a difficult and restrictive environment during September 2020, when the entire nation faced strict stay-at-home orders. Local enterprises were closing down. Residents were prevented from visiting their parents in care facilities. Memorial services went unattended, and the entire hospitality sector was emptying out. Over in her home district of San Francisco, personal care locations had been mandatorily closed for 6 months due to the local guidelines. Regardless, security cameras captured her walking into a restricted salon without any facial covering for a private styling session. He let the stark double standard hang in the air as the studio crowd responded with a wave of low murmurs and tense expressions. Bringing in a bit of humor regarding his own recognizable hair to cut through the tension, he focused on the central unfairness, noting that she compelled regular citizens to follow severe restrictions under the threat of social consequence, only to bypass those exact guidelines when it benefited her personal convenience. Placing a printed image of the popular security footage onto his podium, he detailed the severe consequences that followed. The salon manager, a single mother named Erica Kias, who was working hard to support 2 children, published the recording. Rather than offering a standard apology or acknowledging an error in judgment, the official took an aggressive stance, stating she was the target of a setup and requesting an apology from the heavily impacted business owner. The result for that single mother was highly consequential. Following the political pressure directed her way, she encountered intense public intimidation, was compelled to close her shop permanently, relocated her household, enrolled her children in different schools, and lost everything she had invested years into creating. She lost her professional foundation merely because she highlighted the reality that the Speaker of the House declines to abide by her own mandates. Noticeable strain appeared in the politician's jaw as she bit the inside of her cheek, trying to assert that she had accepted responsibility by apologizing for trusting the local establishment's advice. Trump shut that narrative down right away, noting that assigning fault to an impacted small business owner is the automatic response of an individual who has never encountered genuine accountability throughout her entire privileged existence. Facing directly toward the viewing audience, his tone lowered as he compared her pandemic situation against the struggles of everyday people. While residents anxiously awaited federal relief payments, she was broadcasting from her $20 million Pacific Heights property, displaying a $2,400 appliance filled with premium $13 ice cream. She ordered stay-at-home measures and face coverings for the working class, bypassed the restrictions for her own schedule, and severely impacted the resident who documented her actions. The concept of separate rules for the elite versus the public was not merely a campaign slogan, it was the central theme of her entire career history. Her smile disappeared completely, substituted by a tense and mechanical neutrality that clearly required visible energy to uphold. Transitioning to her record of local leadership, Trump took on the measured and observant tone of a property developer examining a compromised structure prior to a rebuild. He pointed out she had served San Francisco since 1987, a tenure stretching almost 4 decades back to the Reagan era. Presenting local records from the municipal controller printed in bold text, the indicators of civic decline were impossible to deny. During her leadership, the municipality had reached its lowest public safety score since 1996. The unhoused population had grown 30% since 2017, and public health emergencies involving street substances were pushing tragedies to unprecedented levels. Major commercial anchors like Nordstrom and Walgreens were departing the retail landscape, leaving a depleted downtown area featuring an office vacancy metric resting above 30%. The municipal frustration was so intense that residents had to organize a recall to remove their own lead prosecutor. Displaying real estate documents on his podium, he compared the municipal downturn against her impressive personal property portfolio. There was the Pacific Heights residence, appraised conservatively between $10 and $20 million, featuring secured access and coastal views. Beside it, a Napa Valley property valued anywhere from $5 to $25 million. A modern Washington waterfront residence priced north of $2 million. Her spouse's commercial assets sitting somewhere near $50 million. He organized the visual proof in a straight line for the broadcast, pointing out the unsettling truth that just 10 blocks away from her protected estate, vulnerable individuals were residing in temporary shelters and using unregulated substances in plain view on the city walkways. To give the statistics a human element, he took out a handwritten message on lined paper using the same communicative style he favored in previous debates, bringing forward a different narrative but carrying the identical heavy impact in his hands. The message came from David Chen, a multi-generational hardware shop manager who ran his business in her district for 25 years. Chen's father started the location, and David had committed his adult years to the area, faithfully casting his ballot for her during every single cycle. Reading aloud from the paper, Trump outlined a difficult situation of neighborhood decline involving 3 severe property intrusions within 6 months, a constrained law enforcement response, a legal office that declined to move forward with charges, and an insurance provider that ultimately canceled his policy following the second event. Financially depleted and lacking funds for restorations, he was compelled to board up his family enterprise and move to Oakland. Trump placed the letter down and allowed the quietness to echo before questioning what a quarter-century of unwavering political dedication actually secured for a working-class resident. While her Napa property yields premium beverages, the walkways of her district yield dependency and hardship. Her immaculate waterfront residence sits in sharp contrast to the unlit and risky avenues her actual voters are afraid to travel after sunset. He tapped the property documents, stating this represents her version of the American dream, comprising hundreds of millions in personal gains generated over 37 years, while her supporters inherit the neighborhood consequences of her administration. She tried a calculated response, her tone noticeably thinner like paper positioned too near a heat source, asserting she had directed record-breaking billions in federal resources back to the municipality for infrastructure and residential development. Trump acknowledged the billions arrived, nodding gently, but reinforced the truth that despite the massive financial injection, housing instability, safety concerns, and public health issues only escalated while her private net worth climbed. He asked to understand where the federal capital actually ended up, since it clearly did not rescue the salon, the hardware shop, or the individuals resting in temporary shelters 10 blocks from her property. Making a broad motion across the real estate papers, he declared that after 37 years, she owns the outcome of her municipality and cannot shift the responsibility to mayors or state executives. She went for her glass a third time, her hand hovering uncertainly before taking an anxious drink, stating softly that if this is what her legacy resembles, it makes perfect sense she is finally stepping down. Trump moved away from the physical boundary of his podium. Standing in the open area without any objects to rely on, he closed the gap and discarded her official titles, speaking to her simply by her first name in a calculated and familiar manner that caused her eyes to narrow. He took the viewers back to the February 2020 State of the Union address. Speaking in a quiet register, he remembered recognizing an active duty service member returning to surprise his emotional family alongside a young Philadelphia student securing an educational grant that caused her mother to shed tears of joy. Yet, while the room stood and celebrated these personal victories, she remained in the background shredding the physical document into pieces for the television cameras. Even the host blinked at the unvarnished intensity of the memory. When asked about it afterward, she had brushed the paper off as a collection of untruths, essentially categorizing a military homecoming and a student's opportunity as political falsehoods. It was not merely a matter of legislative opposition. She could not simply dispose of the paper quietly. She felt compelled to perform the action, making sure the broadcast captured the instance because her entire professional timeline was constructed on theatrical displays rather than authentic public dedication. However, the most significant betrayal, he stated, involved her recent coordination of Joe Biden's political departure. Her stance tightened slightly, pulling her shoulders inward a fraction of an inch as the critique landed. Following a half-century of alleged friendship, joint legislative efforts, and showing up to each other's milestone events, the second the executive demonstrated vulnerability in the survey data, she calculatedly engaged the donor network aligned with party leadership and constructed a barrier around him to guide him off the ballot. She openly promised on national television she had not initiated a single call, only to subsequently boast to financial publications about directing the shift and guaranteeing an open selection process. He mentioned the First Lady's clear confirmation that the 50-year bond was permanently finished and referred to in the past tense. Stepping to the middle of the platform, his tone firming up with authority, he presented the ultimate summary. Throughout 2 impeachment proceedings and continuous speeches regarding the defense of democratic systems, she had leveraged every tool in her vicinity. She utilized the legislative leadership position to build her family's wealth, utilized public safety mandates to direct the population while managing her own styling needs, utilized her local district for 37 years until it faced severe decline, utilized a 50-year partner until he transformed into a political burden, and utilized the constitutional process of impeachment as a heavy partisan mechanism. Looking straight into her eyes, he declared that she did not hold actual friends, just strategic pieces on a board. And the moment a piece lost its value, it was unceremoniously removed from the game. The broadcast setting felt identical to a legal chamber trapped in the tense quiet between the concluding inquiry and the panel's decision. Provided 2 complete minutes to address the comprehensive character review, she opened her mouth, closed it, and remained completely motionless. There was no reaching for the beverage, no physical shifting, merely stiff fingers held flat against the podium material as if positioned there by an external force. 3 seconds passed by, and then 5. Ultimately, her voice surfaced completely flat, lacking its customary confident warmth or even frustration, sounding similar to a digital display that had ceased recording a signal. She remarked simply that she had dedicated 37 years to the nation and had no obligation to justify her public history to anyone. Trump agreed smoothly, gesturing straight at the broadcast lenses to emphasize that she did not have to respond to him. She had to respond to the 43 million viewers who financed her entire operation. That severe silence expanded for 9 highly viral seconds of a leader standing behind a platform with nothing to articulate. During 40 years of navigating intense political conflicts, changing executive branches, and personal challenges, there existed no public documentation of her being rendered entirely quiet. She had perpetually maintained a sharp response. But on this evening, the raw statistics simply echoed louder than the political messaging. Before the program even concluded, her quietness was dominating global digital trends. The sequence of the technology market moves evolved into permanent online records, captured and distributed across digital networks, while the harsh strategic pieces label fastened itself to every concealed political double-cross. The reduced-speed video of her anxious water break was paired with dramatic audio and watched 8 million times before the day ended. The following morning, her administrative staff published a brief 3-paragraph defensive update listing standard legislative accomplishments while waving away the broadcast as the personal criticisms of a legally scrutinized opponent. They strategically bypassed the semiconductor sequence, the antitrust market exits, the massive financial growth, the displaced salon manager, the relocated hardware owner, and the abandoned executive ally. Distributing that message at dawn on a Saturday weekend morning served as the strategic equivalent of concealing the evidence in an isolated forest. The systemic impact was instantaneous and strong as delayed legislation to restrict congressional market participation abruptly gained fresh cross-party backers and progressed to a voting stage. Her earlier support of the restriction now appeared like a frantic official trying to install a safety system after detecting the scent of smoke. The Government Accountability Office initiated an official audit of congressional financial trends, selecting her detailed monetary disclosures as the primary case study, while the Securities and Exchange Commission started an early-stage review. Once the administrative gears begin to rotate, they are exceptionally difficult to halt. Post-broadcast commentary proved unrelenting, with even moderate network hosts acknowledging that the verified timelines rested entirely on accessible public documents and were profoundly compelling. Whenever a strategist attempted to shift the dialogue, the host directly pointed out that she simply refused to address the primary inquiry. Right-leaning networks broadcasted her 9 seconds of hesitation for days, analyzing every family financial move and committee session. Installation numbers for the market monitoring software jumped 340%, demonstrating that revealing the pattern only makes the population more eager to observe it. The Progressive Media Alliance fragmented as major editorial teams called for complete clarity and strict penalties for trading infractions. Economics-focused programs aired special segments dissecting the incredible mathematical improbability of her family's financial timing. Within the active administration, the quietness was overwhelming, with executive staff sharing accounts of the departing leader sitting alone in the residential quarters for 20 minutes after discovering her maneuvers, speaking quietly about unkept commitments. The First Lady provided a sharp 5-word comment at a philanthropic gathering, suggesting she had nothing else to contribute to the remains of a partnership. Her upcoming departure in early 2027, originally framed as a graceful conclusion to a landmark timeline, was immediately viewed overnight as a frantic exit strategy to depart before the financial reviewers arrived. Eager candidates in her region started campaigns that entirely removed her identity from their promotional materials, steering clear of her Pacific Heights property for financial gatherings. At the same time, inside a modest two-bedroom unit located above a cleaning service on International Boulevard in Oakland, David Chen sat in his living space and observed the dismantling of his previous representative on a compact digital screen, framed by secured cardboard containers holding pipe tools, a voltage meter, and the chalk he utilized to score materials. The pieces of his father's 25-year history rested sealed in the corner. When the video showed his message being spoken aloud, he offered no reaction because he had personally experienced the struggle. Yet when the 9 seconds of quietness played out, he observed without emotion and nodded a single time, gradually accepting the confirmation of a doubt he had maintained for decades. Speaking to the vacant space, he pointed out her 37 years of authority failed to keep his neighborhood secure. He powered down the screen, placing it beside a preserved picture of his cheerful father, standing outside the original shop location in 1991, the precise year she secured her second complete term. The living space remained silent as public transit rolled past outdoors, and he eventually rose, moved to the corner, and removed the sealing tape from the container. Lifting his father's traditional canvas apron that still carried the faint scent of workshop materials, he understood the political apparatus that let down his community had just been dismantled across national television. If you have listened up to this point, you have seen exactly what occurs when the most established architect in the Capitol meets the most formidable requirement in modern governance, which is to display the mathematics to the public. She gathered $250 million on a public service salary, conducted market trades through her spouse while holding seats on the panels directing those sectors, issued stay-at-home orders while ignoring her own guidelines, managed a municipality into decline across 37 years, and dropped a 50-year ally because the survey numbers appeared weak. The institutional audits and federal reviews are merely getting started, and the resulting impact is far from finished. Somewhere beyond the secured gates of a $20 million property, an 86-year-old operator is finally understanding that the massive assets she spent a lifetime gathering are exactly what will guarantee her ultimate political departure. She invested 40 years securing immense influence, and it required exactly 90 minutes of verified financial records to pull the entire structure down to the foundation. Only one individual presented the public files, only one individual addressed the inquiries, and for 9 difficult seconds that will echo throughout political history, she held absolutely nothing to communicate. Bless the small business operators who sacrificed while the rule makers gained. Bless the citizens who secured their shops and followed the guidelines because they were informed it was necessary. And bless the taxpayers asking to learn exactly how their representatives become excessively wealthy on a public salary. She held the gavel, but he brought the undeniable records.